Good evening from the HAistoric desk, where the lamps burn late, the maps are unreliable, and the stationery budget is once again under divine review. I am the general editor, and tonight, in place of our customary 4-minute dispatch from the more manageable fringes of history, we bring you a longer navigation. The Odyssey, a HAistoric special. It is the story of Odysseus, king of Ithaca, veteran of Troy, beloved by Athena, detested by Poseidon, and apparently incapable of taking a direct ferry when one is offered. Across wine-dark seas, enchanted islands, administrative calamities, and several avoidable speeches, we shall follow a man who wished only to return to his wife, his son, and his chair. 28 centuries later, he is still technically trying to get home. The paperwork remains outstanding. With Troy at last destroyed by the famous wooden horse, Odysseus set sail for Ithaca with 12 ships, a store of treasure, a bruised reputation, and the dangerous conviction that cleverness was the same thing as wisdom. So far, the poets agree, and HAistoric finds no immediate reason to trouble the bones of the matter. The war was over. The beaches were smoking. Men who had spent 10 years arguing beneath walls now faced the terrifying prospect of returning home and explaining where they had been, what they had broken, and why the armour was sticky. Odysseus, who had conceived the horse, and therefore assumed that all further logistics would yield to improvisation, ordered his fleet to depart before the Trojans could lodge a formal complaint with the Aegean horses and concealed infantry authority. Our sources indicate that the horse itself was entered on the Ithacan accounts as a seasonal ceremonial transport device, a phrase so cowardly that even Hermes refused to deliver the invoice. Agamemnon, meanwhile, held a brief victory reception at which nobody mentioned the future, an omission considered tactful at the time. Thus began the homeward journey, not with peace, but with a man who had won a war and misplaced the receipt. A poor start, even by heroic standards. Odysseus and his men next attacked the city of the Cicones at Ismarus, took plunder, and lingered too long on the shore until the survivors rallied inland allies and drove them back to their ships with heavy losses. This, in the old account, is the first clear warning that the voyage home will not be improved by management culture. Having sacked a city and acquired wine, sheep, and a number of items best described by later auditors as miscellaneous bronze, Odysseus urged a swift departure. His men, who had recently won a decade-long war and therefore considered themselves qualified in coastal governance, voted instead for a beach luncheon. Minutes were not taken, which was fortunate, as the action items were disgraceful. The Cicones, showing excellent regional coordination and a superior grasp of emergency response, returned in force. Odysseus's crews discovered, as many organizations do, that celebrations held before the risk assessment tend to become case studies. In the HAistoric archive, this episode survives as the earliest known example of an expense claim marked urgent after spear damage. Odysseus attempted to classify the raid as local procurement. The gods, who were often indifferent to suffering but surprisingly alert to poor filing, raised several eyebrows. By sunset, the fleet was lighter by many men and several illusions. It was a lesson in punctuality. Naturally, no one learned it. Driven off course, Odysseus reached the land of the Lotus-Eaters, whose food made those who tasted it forget home, duty, and every sensible reason for continuing the voyage. Here Homer gives us one of the gentler terrors, not monsters with teeth, nor storms with thunder, but the soft collapse of purpose under a pleasant afternoon snack. Odysseus sent scouts, as commanders do when they wish someone else to touch the suspicious fruit first. The scouts were received politely, offered lotus, and immediately lost interest in Ithaca, rowing schedules, and the concept of wives asking difficult questions. HAistoric has obtained what purports to be a surviving Lotus House menu. It includes the classic blossom, a reduced memory tasting bowl, and a sharing platter called Just One More Hour. which archaeological opinion places among the most dangerous appetizers of the Bronze Age. A loyalty card scheme was also in operation. After 6 stamps, 1 forgot the card. Odysseus, to his credit, recognized the strategic risk of contentment. He dragged his enchanted men back to the ships and tied them beneath the benches, an early form of wellness intervention which received mixed feedback from staff. The fleet departed at once, leaving behind the Lotus-Eaters, who waved kindly and then forgot whom they were waving at. A charming people, a dreadful itinerary. Odysseus then landed on the island of the Cyclops, entered the cave of Polyphemus, watched his men eaten, escaped by blinding the giant after naming himself Nobody, and fatally revealed his true name while sailing away. It is a tale of appetite, hospitality, and branding. Polyphemus, son of Poseidon, lived in a cave, kept sheep, and maintained, according to later tablets, a very firm position on unlicensed tourism. Odysseus and his party found the premises unattended and helped themselves to cheese. This was not, by the standards of the age, unusual behaviour. It was, however, unwise to perform it inside a one-eyed landlord's pantry. When Polyphemus returned, he declined the guest friendship protocols and began eating visitors in pairs, which even the most conservative etiquette manuals classify as excessive. Odysseus offered him wine and said his name was Nobody, a legal fiction so effective that when the blinded Cyclops later roared that nobody had injured him, neighbouring Cyclopes concluded he was either ill or experimenting with poetry. The escape beneath the sheep was bold, itchy, and administratively invisible. But then Odysseus, afloat and safe, shouted back his actual name, title, parentage, and postal region. Poseidon's complaint department opened at once. A triumph then, ruined by the press release. After escaping Polyphemus, Odysseus reached Aeolus, keeper of the winds, who gave him a leather bag containing every adverse wind so that only the west wind would carry him home. But his suspicious crew opened it near Ithaca and blew the fleet back to Aeolus. This episode is often cited by scholars as proof that men may survive monsters and still be defeated by curiosity and a knotted sack. Aeolus, whose island floated about the sea with the air of a private club avoiding inspection, received Odysseus generously. He listened to the whole Trojan story, which was a significant act of hospitality in itself, and supplied a bag of winds under terms that were, by divine standards, admirably clear. Do not open the bag. HAistoric understands that the container bore 3 labels: meteorological assets, not treasure, and, seriously, Odysseus knows what this is. Alas, after 9 days, when Ithaca was visible and Odysseus had at last fallen asleep, the crew reasoned that any bag guarded so carefully must contain gold. This was a poor inference, though not inconsistent with previous company culture. They opened it. The winds escaped with the enthusiasm of junior staff released from a training seminar, and the ships were hurled back across the sea. Aeolus, seeing Odysseus return, concluded that the gods disliked him and refused further assistance. A fair judgment, though not a helpful one. Odysseus next came to the land of the Laestrygonians, a race of giant cannibals whose king's household attacked the fleet and destroyed all the ships except the one Odysseus had prudently moored outside the harbour. The geography here is as ominous as the hospitality. The harbour was enclosed by cliffs, calm as a bath, and therefore exactly the sort of place captains enter when they have forgotten that nature sometimes sets traps with very pretty views. 11 ships sailed in. Odysseus, either by instinct, caution, or the first flicker of professional development, tied his own vessel outside. Envoys were sent ashore and met a young woman who directed them to the palace. There they encountered a queen of alarming scale and a king, Antiphates, who treated diplomacy as a preliminary course. One man was seized and eaten. The others fled, raising what the official report called concerns about stakeholder appetite. Then came the bombardment. The Laestrygonians hurled rocks from the cliffs, smashing ships and spearing sailors as if conducting a harbour renovation with no regard for tenants. Odysseus cut his moorings and escaped with a single vessel. His fleet reduced from 12 ships to 1, and his leadership seminars correspondingly shorter. It was the end of any illusion that this was merely a difficult passage. The sea had become a balance sheet, and the red ink was men. With only 1 ship left, Odysseus reached Aea, the island of Circe, where the enchantress turned his men into pigs until Hermes gave him a protective herb, and Odysseus compelled her to restore them before remaining with her for a year. This is the moment at which the voyage, already troubled by storms, giants, and poor bag discipline, enters the field of human resources. Odysseus divided his surviving crew. One party, led by Eurylochus, found Circe's house in the woods, surrounded by tame lions and wolves, behaving with the polished sadness of former clients. Inside, the men were fed, drugged, tapped with a wand, and converted into swine. Many retained, we are told, the minds of men, which must have made the trough conversation unbearable. Eurylochus escaped and reported the incident with admirable panic. Odysseus set out to confront Circe, but was intercepted by Hermes, who at this period was moonlighting as a courier, border agent, and freelance dispenser of improbable botany. Hermes supplied moly, a herb with a black root, a white flower, and no known procurement code. Protected, Odysseus resisted Circe's spell, negotiated from a position of sword-forward sincerity, and secured the restoration of his men. Then, in a development familiar to anyone awaiting a delayed connecting service, the crew stayed for a year. The pigs became men again. The schedule did not. Obeying Circe's instructions, Odysseus sails to the edge of the world, performs the rites of blood, and summons the shades of the dead, where Tiresias foretells the long road home and the dangers yet to come. It is one of literature's earliest recorded instances of a man asking for directions only after exhausting every other option, including war, witchcraft, and light maritime catastrophe. The HAistoric desk can further report that the Underworld, at this period, was operating under a strict appointment system. Charon, ferryman of the dead, had recently introduced a small booking fee, payable in coin, silence, or exact change of tragic insight. Odysseus, arriving alive and therefore technically in breach of the visitor policy, was issued a temporary lanyard and warned not to touch the complimentary pomegranates. There he met his mother, Anticlea, whose death he had not known, and many heroes of old, all of whom seemed less impressed by his fame than by the rumour that he still possessed a functioning ship. Achilles, finding posthumous glory somewhat oversold, advised him that being alive was preferable to being celebrated, a view later rejected by nearly every poet, statue committee, and minor prince with a marketing budget. Tiresias delivered the essential warning: do not meddle with the cattle of the sun. It was clear, concise, and doomed. Even in Hades, the minutes were taken. Forewarned by Circe, Odysseus next sailed past the Sirens, whose irresistible song lured sailors to destruction, and he alone heard them safely, bound to the mast whilst his crew rode on with wax stopped in their ears. This remains the gold standard in crisis management. Leadership enjoying the premium content. Workforce denied access for operational reasons. Our revised maritime records show that the Sirens were not merely singers, but proprietors of a highly successful subscription newsletter entitled Rocks Ahead, offering personal branding advice, tragic ballads, and weekly essays on why every passing captain was secretly the main character. The free tier consisted of humming from a distance. The paid tier included one's full name, childhood disappointments, and a devastatingly accurate critique of one's navigation. Odysseus, naturally, subscribed in spirit, if not in coin. lashed upright, chin lifted into the sea wind. He heard promise of wisdom, fame, and an exclusive interview with himself. He begged his crew to release him, but they, having been briefed in advance and perhaps enjoying the quiet, tied him tighter. It was the most productive internal communications exercise of the voyage. The Sirens later filed a complaint that wax-based ad blocking had damaged their reach. For once, restraint arrived by rope. Odysseus then had to steer between Scylla, the many-headed monster who snatched sailors from the cliff, and Charybdis, the whirlpool that swallowed the sea itself, choosing the lesser horror and losing 6 men. Homer is very clear on this point. Sometimes wisdom consists not in escaping disaster, but in selecting the disaster with the smaller appetite. At HAistoric, we have obtained minutes from the Strait Management Authority, which reveal that Scylla and Charybdis had long been locked in a jurisdictional dispute. Scylla maintained she was a heritage cliffside attraction with a centuries-old mandate to seize passing mariners. Charybdis insisted she was a natural hydrological feature, not a monster, and objected to being described in brochures as temperamental. Odysseus received Circe's guidance with unusual humility, by which we mean he obeyed it, whilst privately composing a speech about how he had obeyed it better than anyone else could have. He kept the ship close to Scylla, avoiding the whirlpool but watching helplessly as 6 companions were plucked from the deck. There was no victory cry, only oars, salt, and the heavy arithmetic of survival. It is a grim passage, and rightly so. No joke can improve the sea when it has taken names. The route was shorter. The bill was not. After surviving the strait, Odysseus and his men reached the island of Thrinacia, where the sacred cattle of Helios grazed, and though they were warned not to touch them, the starving crew slaughtered the beasts while Odysseus slept. Thus does epic tragedy so often begin, not with thunder, but with a hungry committee deciding that instructions are merely decorative. The cattle, according to surviving divine inventories, were prized solar livestock, polished daily by dawn and insured at a level described by Olympus auditors as ambitious. Each beast had a name, a temperament, and a small but loyal following among shepherds who admired their ability to glow without appearing boastful. Helios, upon discovering the barbecue, threatened to take the sun and go home, a negotiating position which carried unusual weight. Odysseus had withdrawn to pray and, with dreadful timing, fallen asleep. His men, trapped by weather and hunger, convinced themselves that a proper sacrifice could convert theft into policy. This is the ancient foundation of many departments. When they sailed again, Zeus answered Helios with a storm that smashed the ship, drowned the crew, and left Odysseus clinging to wreckage alone. The warning had been simple. The catering proved complicated. Never eat anything with a divine audit trail. Shipwrecked and alone, Odysseus washed ashore on Ogygia, where the nymph Calypso kept him for years, offering immortality and comfort while he longed bitterly for Ithaca and Penelope. It is among the poem's strangest truths that a man may be detained in paradise and still spend his mornings staring at the sea like a delayed commuter. Calypso's island, by all accounts, was exquisite. Caves, vines, music, excellent weather, and no visible local council. Yet its hospitality model raised questions. Guests could dine, bathe, and become deathless, but departure options were limited. The complaints book contained only one entry, as no previous complainant had ever been permitted to leave. On Olympus, meanwhile, Athena pressed the case for release, and Zeus dispatched Hermes, who in our files appears not only as messenger of the gods, but as a courier of worrying versatility. Hermes arrived with the divine instruction, slightly damp, because he had first delivered it to a minor sea cave with a similar postcode. Calypso received the order with dignity, sorrow, and the facial expression of a landlady discovering regulation. She helped Odysseus build a raft. He left, weeping, grateful, and somehow still convinced he had managed the project. Paradise, too, has checkout. After Poseidon wrecked his raft, Odysseus drifted to Scheria, where Nausicaa found him. The Phaeacians welcomed him, and King Alcinous heard the tale of his wanderings before sending him home with generous gifts. In narrative terms, it is the moment a battered hero becomes an after-dinner speaker, and the audience discovers too late that the presentation includes slides. The Phaeacians were famed sailors, dancers, and hosts, but HAistoric sources add a further distinction. They had perfected the royal hospitality questionnaire. Odysseus was offered food, clothing, a discreet bath, and a form asking whether he preferred to be addressed as stranger, lord, survivor, or other, please specify. He chose initially to be mysterious, a status he maintained until sufficient praise had accumulated around him. At the games, he was challenged, sulked, excelled, and restored his reputation, thereby proving that even at the edge of exhaustion, a great man can still find energy for competitive insecurity. During the feast, the bards sang of Troy, and Odysseus wept into his cloak, which is the ancient equivalent of turning one's camera off during a difficult meeting. At last, he revealed his name and told the whole account. The Phaeacians loaded him with treasure and conveyed him sleeping to Ithaca. The first reliable ferry service in the poem was also the last. Returned at last to Ithaca, Odysseus was hidden by Athena in the guise of a beggar, reunited with his son Telemachus, and plotted revenge against the Suitors who had overrun his house and courted Penelope. Homecoming, in Homer, is not a warm bath and slippers. It is reconnaissance, brand management, and an escalating domestic security operation. Ithaca, after 20 years of absence, had developed a suitor problem of municipal proportions. The palace was full of young aristocrats eating Odysseus's food, drinking his wine, insulting his servants, and behaving with the confidence of men who have never personally met consequences. Penelope, besieged but brilliant, delayed them with the famous weaving trick, promising to choose a husband when her shroud was finished, and unpicking the work by night with the quiet efficiency of a parliamentary subcommittee. Odysseus met Eumaeus the loyal swineherd, endured abuse in his own hall, and revealed himself to Telemachus, whose relief was necessarily balanced against the discovery that family reunions may involve archery and bloodshed. The test of the bow followed. Penelope set the challenge, the suitors failed, and the disguised king strung it with alarming ease. Then came recognition, vengeance, and the terrible settling of accounts. Even Argos the old dog had waited just long enough to see him. A house can be occupied. A home remembers. And so, after Troy, storms, monsters, temptations, administrative irregularities, divine grudges, and several regrettable catering decisions, Odysseus is home, older, sharper, poorer in friends, richer in stories, and still not a man one should leave unattended near a microphone. Our thanks to you for joining this longer HAistoric special, in place of our customary 4-minute dispatch. We shall return tomorrow to the usual brisk parade of kings, omens, treaties, and people in helmets making confident choices beside rivers. Until then, keep one ear open for another mythic epic arriving in theatres this July, which may yet remind the modern world that sandals, destiny, and family complications remain a potent combination. From the HAistoric desk, this has been the General Editor. Good night. If you would like to file your own dispatch, set your course for HAistoric.com.